US President Joe Biden confirming he will run for re-election in 2024. The 80-year-old says he wants to stay on for another term to finish the job, with a potential rematch against Donald Trump looming.
And for more on President Biden's re-election bid, Professor Gordon Flake, CEO of Perth USAsia Centre at the University of Western Australia, joins us live from Seoul. Professor Flake, we just heard earlier in the bulletin that video that President Biden has released to launch his re-election bid. He says, "We are in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are." A reminder in case Americans have forgotten that if he loses, the alternative might be Mr. Trump. Or that might have been the strategy when he ran for presidency in the first time. On repeat, does it weaken or strengthen?
My guess is it's about the same. In a normal U.S. election cycle, the loser just goes away. No longer has kind of the media profile of the former president, Donald Trump. But I don't think there's anybody in America that doesn't know today that Donald Trump has already declared his candidacy and is likely to be the Republican nominee. And so the framing of this as a recontested battle, of finishing the job, of continuing, this kind of systemic battle that President Biden has kind of framed in his video message, is one that I think will probably be well understood by most Americans.
Could he not, perhaps with greater success, point to his substantial achievements, and he has had them since 2021?
No, in contrast to expectations, he's had a very effective first 2 years, but that was when he had control of both the Senate and the House. Things are a little bit slower now as Republicans have regained control of the House of Representatives. And Vice President Biden remains relatively unpopular, pretty much about norm. He's got about 42% approval rating and about 54% disapproval rating. So he's what you would call 11 percentage points underwater. But that's kind of par for the course for presidents at this term of their presidency. And ultimately, elections are about choices. They're really not about approval ratings.
Again, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. According to some analysts, his approval ratings hit 40%, low 40s, after the U.S. withdrawal, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and stayed there pretty much without moving. So it does matter what happens. One would imagine it doesn't matter in terms of foreign policy. It does matter to Americans back home. And yet we have seen America lend a very real seriousness to its foreign policy in dealings with China, in dealings with Russia, in its invasion of Ukraine. These should surely lift Mr. Biden's standing at home. Well,
again, Americans don't care about foreign policy unless they see it as directly impacting them. If you're like myself and many in my field, obviously there has been a restoration of American commitment to alliances, to the international community, to international standards and norms and treaties. And so other than declared opponents of the United States, I dare say that were President Biden and President Trump to have an election globally, it would be a hands-down, overwhelming victory for President Biden. But Americans look at basic kitchen table issues, what they call it, domestic economic issues. Do they think they're better off? Do they think the country's going in the right direction? But ultimately, still, rather than foreign policy, they're going to be focused on a choice between, in this case, it looks likely to be President Biden and former President Donald Trump. And so that's really how the issue will be framed.
Right. So even if we compare one with the other, we look at domestic achievements. So kitchen table items such as billions of dollars poured into the pandemic, into infrastructure projects, into climate change, into mental health, bipartisan deals on gun ownership as well. These things, surely they count for something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the unemployment rate is at historic lows. By all accounts, that stimulus has been very, very effective. And yet still, only about 25% of Americans say that the United States is moving in the right direction. So there is this malaise or this gloom, if you will, which makes me, again, focus less on economic performance, less on individual bills, and much more on the choice. There's a really interesting poll out that shows among people who disapprove of both Biden and Trump, about 54% would choose Biden over Trump to only 15% for Trump, right? And those are the swing voters, right? So you can say, I disapprove, pox on both your houses, but ultimately it's a choice. It was in 2020, it will be again in 2024.
So a final, and it might sound rather simplistic, but given this general malaise, would not a simple message like "Make America Great Again" resound far more greatly with the populace than something more nuanced like democracy versus authoritarianism? Final question.
Well, again, Biden's slogan is "Let's finish the job," and to be honest, it's really democracy versus authoritarianism at home. He's counting on Americans that are afraid of Trump. He's counting on Americans that are afraid of the Republican Party that have been rolling back rights and women's rights and voting rights, et cetera, to kind of stand up domestically. And that worked again in 2020. And we'll have to see for 2024. But as of right now, it seems that the former president, Donald Trump, has done little to increase the size of his base, which has been slowly shrinking. And President Biden seems to be holding on to his. And so early days, but we'll see how it plays out.
I will certainly see. We're speaking to Professor Gordon Flake, CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre at the University of Western Australia. Thanks for speaking to us.